January 1st, 2024, on New Year's Day in Addis Ababa, two men sit at a table: Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, and Mus Bihi Abdi, the President of Somaliland, a self-declared state that broke away from Somalia in 1991 and has never been recognized by any UN member. They signed a memorandum of understanding. The deal would give landlocked Ethiopia a 50-year lease over roughly 20 kilometers of coastline near Berbera on the Gulf of Aden, commercial use, a naval facility, and in return, Ethiopia signals something explosive: a pathway toward recognizing Somaliland as an independent nation. This isn't just economics now, it's about sovereignty. Somalia considers Somaliland part of its territory. Within hours, Mogadishu calls the agreement null and void, a violation of territorial integrity. The government says it will defend its land and sea by any legal means, and then almost immediately, the region starts rearranging itself. Over the following months, Somalia deepens ties with Ethiopia's main rivals, Eritrea, whose relationship with Addis Ababa collapsed after the Tigray War, and Egypt, locked in a high-stakes confrontation with Ethiopia over the Nile. By October, the presidents of Somalia, Eritrea, and Egypt are meeting at a trilateral summit, pledging closer security cooperation. The military temperature rises. By 2025, analysts warn about Eritrean troop movements near Ethiopia's northern border. Prime Minister Abiy goes to parliament with a message meant to calm the room while still signaling resolve. Ethiopia's push for Red Sea access, he says, is, quote, irreversible, but will be pursued peacefully. The fact that he has to say that out loud tells you everything. One deal signed on New Year's Day, and suddenly, the Horn of Africa, a region already facing famine, displacement, and terrorism, is drifting toward new blocs, new enemies, and new red lines. But how did it come to this? This is the story of how the Horn of Africa continues to tear itself apart. The Horn of Africa is this dagger of land protruding into one of the world's most strategic maritime corridors. The Red Sea to the north, the Gulf of Aden to the east. Together, these waters carry roughly a tenth of global trade. At the center sits Ethiopia, more than 120 million people, the second most populous country in Africa, a civilization stretching back millennia, a state that was never formally colonized despite Italy's brief occupation. Ethiopia sees itself as a natural regional power, a giant meant to lead, but it has a wound that wouldn't heal. Since 1993, Ethiopia has had no coastline. Eritrea's independence turned Africa's second largest population into a landlocked state. Today, the overwhelming majority of Ethiopia's trade flows through a single port in Djibouti, one choke point, one small nation. Ethiopian officials describe this as an untenable strategic vulnerability, a dependency that could strangle the economy overnight if relations ever soured. For 3 decades, Ethiopian leaders have searched for alternatives. In 2018, it seemed like they found one. A new Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, young, charismatic, a former intelligence officer who captured the public imagination within months. Abiy did something extraordinary. He made peace with Eritrea. The two countries had fought a brutal border war from 1998 to 2000. Tens of thousands killed. The frontier was sealed for nearly 2 decades. Abiy flew to Asmara. He embraced Eritrea's president, Isaias Afwerki. The border opened. Families separated for 20 years crossed again. There were tears, embraces, real joy. In 2019, Abiy Ahmed won the Nobel Peace Prize.
The Nobel Peace Prize for 2019 to Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali.
But look closer. That peace wasn't brokered by the African Union. It wasn't driven by IGAD, the Horn's own regional body. Instead, it was shepherded by Gulf powers, the UAE and Saudi Arabia, countries seeking stability along Red Sea shipping routes during their war in Yemen. African institutions were sidelined. A landmark African peace shaped outside Africa, and this became the first glimpse of Abiy's governing style. Personal diplomacy, bilateral deals, a willingness to bypass traditional structures. Well, it didn't last. And there was another dimension to that peace, one that would matter enormously. Eritrea's president had a long-standing enemy, the Tigray People's Liberation Front. The TPLF had dominated Ethiopian politics for decades and led the earlier war against Eritrea. Abiy was not from Tigray. His rise marked a rupture. The TPLF retreated to its home region, isolated and resentful. Many analysts would later argue that the Abiy-Isaias reconciliation wasn't just about ending a Cold War. It was in fact about a shared adversary. In November 2020, that theory was tested. War erupted between Ethiopia's federal government and the TPLF. Eritrea, newly at peace on paper, sent its forces across the border to fight alongside Ethiopian troops. What followed became one of the deadliest conflicts of the 21st century. Estimates put the death toll in the hundreds of thousands, from combat, hunger, and the collapse of healthcare. Some studies suggest the upper bound approaches 500,000. Millions were displaced. Credible investigations documented atrocities committed by multiple parties. Eritrean refugees, people who had escaped their own country and sought safety in Ethiopia, found themselves trapped in the war zone. Camps were attacked and destroyed. There were reports of forced returns and abductions, and the region's institutions, well, they failed. IGAD, designed to manage exactly this kind of crisis, proved powerless. Ethiopia insisted the war was an internal matter. Eritrea was a combatant. The organization was paralyzed. When the fighting formally ended in November 2022 with a peace agreement signed in South Africa under African Union mediation, someone was missing from that table. Eritrea. Not a signatory, not consulted in the final settlement. For Asmara, the war had brought losses, costs, and bloodshed. The peace brought no seats, no guarantees, and no rewards. The seeds of new rift were then planted. And on the ground, the 2018 miracle quietly unraveled. Within a year, the borders that had reopened were sealed yet again. Trade dried up, the promise of normalization faded. Families who had just found each other were separated once more. This quickly became a peace made for headlines, not for permanence. After Tigray, Abiy Ahmed had ground to recover. Ethiopia's economy was strained, foreign currency was scarce, aid frozen. Its international standing was shattered by the war. But one obsession never faded: the sea. In speeches through late 2023 and into 2024, Abiy argued that Ethiopia's lack of maritime access wasn't just an economic problem, it was a historical injustice. He spoke of Ethiopia's right to regain access to the Red Sea corridor. In Eritrea and Somalia, those words landed like a shockwave. Eritrea's foreign ministry accused Ethiopian commentators of promoting historical falsehoods, narratives questioning how Eritrea's borders were drawn, why it emerged as an independent state at all. For a country that fought decades of armed struggle for sovereignty, this crossed a red line. And for Ethiopia, if the northern route was politically radioactive, Addis Ababa looked south to Somaliland. You see, Somaliland had what Ethiopia wanted: a coastline and the port of Berbera, already been expanded with Emirati investment. And Somaliland wanted something Ethiopia could offer, which was recognition. For more than 30 years, it had operated as a de facto state with its own government, elections, and security forces, but without any formal international recognition. The January 1st memorandum offered both sides a version of what they craved. To Mogadishu, it was something else entirely: an existential threat. Since 1991, Somalia has been clawing its way back from total state collapse. Decades of civil war, clan violence, foreign intervention. Al-Shabaab still controls territory. Mass casualty attacks continue. The existence of a functioning federal government at all is fragile. And Somalia today is a patchwork. Somaliland, meanwhile, in the northwest seeks independence. Puntland in the northeast governs itself. Federal states like Jubaland operate with their own leaders and external relationships. Everyone hedges, and for years, Ethiopia has played a central role in this, maintaining ties with Somali regions, keeping Mogadishu from consolidating too much power. From Somalia's perspective, this has never felt neutral. It has felt like containment. So, when Ethiopia signed a deal that appeared to legitimize Somaliland separation, the response was immediate. President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud moved fast. Within months, Somalia deepened ties with Eritrea and with Egypt, a country with limited historical involvement in Somali affairs, but a burning dispute with Ethiopia over the Nile. By late 2024, the three presidents were meeting together: Somalia, Eritrea, Egypt, a new alignment, widely read as a counterweight to Ethiopia. And here's the irony of Abiy's Sea Gambit. He framed it as self-preservation, diversifying trade routes, reducing vulnerability. But instead, it unified his rivals, turned former partners into opponents, and produced exactly the kind of strategic encirclement Ethiopian planners have always feared. Now, here's what makes the Horn so dangerous right now. Every mini block creates a counter block. Every alliance triggers a realignment. The region doesn't stabilize, it fragments further. And when that happens, two forces rush into the vacuum. The first is history. None of this dysfunction is new. Take Al-Shabaab. The group has waged an insurgency in Somalia for more than 15 years. It has bombed cities in Kenya and Uganda. It recruits across borders. It threatens everyone. Since 2007, the African Union has maintained a peacekeeping mission in Somalia, AMISOM, later ATMIS. Troops from Ethiopia, Kenya, Djibouti, Uganda, and Burundi have fought side by side against the same enemy. And yet, around 2020, something absurd happened. Somalia and Kenya, both frontline states against Al-Shabaab, fell into a bitter diplomatic feud. Ambassadors expelled, relations severed, border tensions flared. The dispute centered partly on a maritime boundary case, partly on Kenya's cultivation of ties with Jubaland, a Somali federal state at odds with Mogadishu. All the while, Kenyan and Somali soldiers remained deployed together, fighting the same militants, under the same command structure. For Al-Shabaab, the messaging was effortless. If neighbors can't even trust each other, why should you trust them? A political rift at the top became a recruiting gift on the ground. Or take Sudan. In April 2023, war erupted between rival military factions. Within months, tens of thousands were feared dead, millions displaced. IGAD attempted to mediate. Kenya's president was appointed to lead the effort. Sudan's military leadership rejected him. They accused him of bias. They threatened to withdraw from IGAD entirely. The talks collapsed. The war continued. The institution designed to prevent this paralyzed by the politics it was supposed to manage. This is the trap. IGAD has no standing peacekeeping force, no enforcement mechanism. It is a forum of heads of state, and when those leaders fall out, the organization freezes. Foreign policy swings wildly with leadership changes. Somalia leaned toward Ethiopia under one president and away from it under the next. Eritrea shifts from wartime ally to peacetime rival in the span of a few years. And when formal institutions fail, a second force fills the vacuum: outsiders. Around 2015, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates launched their war in Yemen. They needed control of the African shore of the Red Sea. The Horn suddenly mattered more than ever. Eritrea jumped in early. The UAE built a major military base at Assab, a launchpad for air and naval operations. Sudan sent thousands of troops to fight in Yemen. Djibouti and Somalia offered political support. Then came the Gulf Rift. When Saudi Arabia and UAE fell out with Qatar in 2017, Horn governments were pressured to choose sides. Somalia's federal government leaned toward Qatar and Turkey. Somaliland and Puntland moved closer to the UAE. From Mogadishu's perspective, Abu Dhabi was cultivating Somalia's breakaway regions, undermining the state from within. In 2018, Somalia expelled Emirati military trainers. Gulf rivalries mapped neatly onto Horn divisions, and even after Gulf states reconciled, the fractures they had embedded did not disappear. Global powers followed. Djibouti, a country of fewer than 1 million people, became the most militarized patch of land in Africa. It hosts bases from the United States, France, Japan, and China. The US operates Camp Lemonnier. China opened its first ever overseas military facility there in 2017, just a few kilometers away. Djibouti charges handsomely for the privilege, and it remains remarkably stable, partly because too many powerful countries depend on it to fail. China reshaped the region economically. It financed the railway linking Addis Ababa to Djibouti. It built industrial parks across Ethiopia. The United States focused on counter-terrorism, drone strikes, training missions, security partnerships. But pressure cut both ways. When Washington sharply criticized Ethiopia's conduct during the Tigray War, Abiy bristled and looked elsewhere. Russia moved in too. Moscow negotiated for a naval logistics facility at Port Sudan. Russian-linked mercenaries operated inside Sudan before their own internal upheavals. This is what outside involvement does to the Horn. It gives governments options. If a neighbor applies pressure, you can seek weapons from the UAE, training from Turkey, loans from China, diplomatic cover from Russia. You don't have to compromise with your neighbor if an external patron backs your position. The Ethiopia-Eritrea peace of 2018 showed the upside. Gulf mediation made a breakthrough possible when African mechanisms had failed, but it also revealed the cost. The deal served immediate external interest, but it lacked a regional framework to sustain it. No institution to manage disputes when the spotlight moved on. So it frayed, and now the pattern repeats. Somalia, Eritrea, Egypt aligning against Ethiopia. Ethiopia is still pursuing sea access. The January 1st deal didn't resolve anything, it just reshuffled the board. Every side is seeking leverage. Every alliance is hardening into rivalry. Every institution is too weak to intervene. And so the trap holds. Now, everything we've talked about so far can sound abstract, I know, but across the Horn of Africa, tens of millions of people still live inside the consequences. When cooperation fails, ordinary people pay the price. In northern Ethiopia, the Tigray War claimed lots of lives. Estimates suggest hundreds of thousands dead. Some studies put the upper bound near 500,000 when hunger and collapsed healthcare are considered. In Sudan, war erupted in April 2023 and became almost overnight one of the world's largest displacement crises. On the Ethiopian-Eritrea border, families reunited in 2018 only to be separated again when crossings closed. Trade was cut off. A brief window of hope slammed shut. For pastoralists, the cost is survival. The Horn has some of the world's largest pastoral communities, people whose livelihoods depend on moving with herds along routes older than modern borders. When borders harden, when choke points multiply, when tension militarize frontiers, animals can't reach grazing lands, they can't reach markets, livelihoods will collapse. And during drought, when mobility matters most, political barriers become lethal. Between 2020 and 2023, large parts of the Horn suffered 5 to 6 consecutive failed rainy seasons, the worst droughts in decades. Crops collapsed, pastures vanished, millions of livestock died. Each government declared its own emergency. Each appealed to donors separately. Millions of people across Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya slid into acute hunger. The absence of a regional safety net turned a climate shock into a humanitarian catastrophe. Economically, fragmentation shows up everywhere. Africa's internal trade remains low, often estimated around 10 to 15% of total trade. In Europe, that figure is commonly cited around 70%. Even where roads exist and markets sit close, politics block commerce. Checkpoints, rival administrations, distrust. Djibouti remains Ethiopia's dominant gateway, a single corridor carrying the weight of a massive economy. That vulnerability raises cost for everyone, and hanging over all of it is demography. This is one of the youngest regions on earth. Millions of young people enter the job market every year. In an integrated region, shared infrastructure, freer movement, functioning trade, growth could spread across borders. But in a fragmented region, opportunities are strangled even before they can scale. So many young people do what young people do when the future disappears. They just up and leave. Some take the long route through the Sahara and Libya toward Mediterranean. Others cross through Yemen toward the Gulf. Eritreans flee a system of indefinite conscription. Somalis flee war and insurgency. Ethiopians and Sudanese flee conflicts that shatter their communities. And the drain becomes its own trap. Talent leaves, institutions weakens, instability deepens, and more people leave. This is a cycle. And there's a saying, when elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. In the Horn of Africa, ordinary people are the grass. Farmers, herders, traders, mothers and children, caught between rivalries they didn't choose, paying for conflicts they didn't start, waiting for leaders to pay attention to their plight. So where does this end? Now, here's what is true as at right now. The January 1st deal still casts a shadow. Somaliland insists the memorandum stands. Ethiopia has never buried the idea of sea access. And in late 2025, Prime Minister Abiy called the pursuit, quote, irreversible, but insisted it would happen through legal and diplomatic channels. And there has been movement. In December 2024, after months of escalation, Ethiopia and Somalia signed the Ankara Declaration under Turkish mediation. Both sides reaffirmed sovereignty and territorial integrity. They agreed to explore a commercial sea access arrangement for Ethiopia under Somalia's sovereign authority. But at the same time, Somalia's alignment with Eritrea and Egypt didn't disappear. The trilateral mechanism continued at ministerial level through 2025, framed around security cooperation. So the reality is contradiction. The escalation in one room, counterbalancing in another. That is the Horn of Africa for you. The forces pulling it apart are powerful. Historical grievances, weak institutions, external powers, all pursuing their own agendas. Leaders who see neighbors as threats before they see partners. The trend line still bends toward fragmentation, but here's what is also true. The divisions are man-made, and what humans have made, humans cannot make. The next decade will be written by choices made in palaces and summit halls, between rivalry and compromise, between reaching for leverage or extending a hand. But here's the image I want to leave you with. Somewhere on the Ethiopia-Eritrean border, there's a family that reunited in 2018. Parents who hadn't seen their children in 20 years. They had 1 year together, maybe less. Then the crossing closed again. Now they're waiting on opposite sides of a line drawn by men who have never met them. That family is the Horn of Africa, connected by history, separated by politics, and waiting for someone to open the door. The question isn't whether the region can change, it is whether anyone in power wants it to.